Hello and welcome to the Asian Insider. I'm Nirmal Ghosh. On this edition, we focus on India, where Narendra Modi recently completed 100 days into his second five-year term as Prime Minister. Modi described his century in his second coming as development, trust, and big changes. Congress, though, responded with three words of their own: tyranny, chaos, and anarchy. Two polar opposite takes on Modi's leadership. Joining me on the show are Bhagyashree Garikar, our Deputy Foreign Editor, and Vikram Khanna, Associate Editor, both at the Straits Times in Singapore. So we have no shortage of action in Narendra Modi's second term, not least the change of the status quo in Kashmir, which we'll get to. But first, let's talk about the economy and about trade. Now, Bhagya, you covered the India-Singapore Business and Innovation Summit, and you interviewed India's Foreign Minister, Jaishankar. What was your takeaway?
Firstly, the summit, which was basically held to coincide with 100 days of, Modi's second term, was mainly about investments and the economy. The economy hasn't made such good headlines lately, but India was going at it hammer and tongs about the investment potential that there is in India. So as we know, Mr. Modi has set himself a target of doubling the economy to $5 trillion in the 5 years of his term. And it is that bit that India was keen to highlight at this seminar. Now, the foreign minister had a couple of messages of his own in that seminar, as well as in an interview that he gave us about the economy. One thing that came up was, RCEP, this big mega trade deal that India is negotiating with ASEAN, China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. India's decision on that is much awaited, and I think ASEAN is pushing strongly for India to be part of this big trade deal.
So Bhagya, also at the summit, there was the question of this capital city, or the planned capital city in the state of Andhra Pradesh in India, called Amravati. Now there's a new state government in Andhra Pradesh, led by Jagan Mohan Reddy, which has disavowed Amravati, which was one of the hobby horses of the previous Chief Minister Chandrababu Naidu. So, can you tell us a little about why the state government in Andhra Pradesh is disavowing Amravati, and what the consequences of this?
Right at the very first inaugural session, there was a panel that featured Professor Tommy Koh, Singapore's ambassador at large, as the moderator. So, and the other two participants on this panel were the Indian and the Singapore foreign minister. And Tommy Koh actually posed this question to the Indian foreign minister: is the Amravati project, is it sick, is it very sick, or is it dead? So a very pointed question, and to which we heard the foreign minister Jaishankar actually deflect that question. So he parried it, saying it's up to the state government to answer. Now the state government had a representative, their finance minister, who was in the audience, and now he didn't speak up then, we didn't hear his comeback on it, but a little later he had a speech in which he was touting the investment potential in Andhra Pradesh. He talked about other priorities for his government.
Right.
So immediately afterwards, I actually rushed to get his interview on this. I said, you've got to tell us what to make of this project, because it is of concern to Singapore investors, and it is a thing which is very much in the headlines for Singapore, and as it was for India and Andhra Pradesh as well. He was quite categoric. He said, it is not our priority. We don't have money for this project. The state government, as we've inherited it, does not have revenues coming in. Therefore, there is this problem. The other thing which he also says, and which we haven't heard before, is that this capital, which was to come up on the banks of the river Krishna, is in a flood-prone area. It's in a drought-prone area at the same time. And if you were to believe him, prone to cyclones as well. So according to him, it's not a good idea to begin with. Various recommendations from certain committees were basically disregarded.
Right. So coming to the economy in general, Vikram, has there been much job creation? And there is a slowdown in India, right?
Yes, the growth in the April to June quarter was 5%, which is the slowest since 2013. So it's a pretty sharp slowdown, and it looks like it might get worse. I don't think this slowdown has come out of a clear blue sky. I mean, what's happened, I think, is it's the consequence of some past reforms from the Modi government, some good reforms and some not so good reforms.
Okay, so going back to the RCEP for just for a moment, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, Singapore is keen that India join RCEP. ASEAN is keen. What is India's issue with that exactly?
Well, a couple of issues which their foreign minister as well as their union minister of state outlined at that summit. One is that India fears that as a consequence of joining RCEP, it would have to, lower its tariffs. And once you do that, the Indian market, they fear, is going to be flooded with cheap Chinese goods. That would be a big problem for the Indian manufacturers. So India is keen for that not to happen. That would be a big hit for the Modi government if that were to happen. The other thing is that India says that at the same time as this, it does not have equal access to the Chinese market. Another issue for India, which also came up, is that India says that regulations for trade in services, which is basically India's strength, is not available adequately. It's not as well enforced as, say, regulations for trade in goods. So those are a couple of big concerns for India.
I mean, this RCEP is very goods-centric. It is not services-centric, and India's comparative advantage is services. So I think that issue is a big issue that needs addressing. That includes a movement of professionals. But on liberalization of trade in general, I think the Singapore and ASEAN are making this point, that India has had a generally good experience with liberalization. I mean, after it liberalized its economy in 1991, it was able to break out of this Hindu rate of growth of 2.5%. And the liberalization served the economy very well. And I think people also make the point that without RCEP, India cannot plug into the supply chains. It cannot get its manufacturing off the ground because manufacturing is now supply chain based. And if you're going to shut yourself out from this wider trade deal, you're not going to get into the supply chain system. So if India wants to get its manufacturing off the ground, it would need to plug into RCEP.
Narendra Modi did something rather Trumpian, actually. He changed the status quo in Jammu and Kashmir. There's been a huge reaction to that, of course. It's been very controversial. In short, the Modi government has said this way Kashmir will get much more development. It will bring Jammu and Kashmir into the mainstream and so forth. The only problem is Kashmiris apparently did not get the memo, and Indian security forces clamped down ahead of the announcement and are still in a clampdown. Now, specifically, how has this changed the relationship with Pakistan?
Pakistan has been beating the drum on the human rights violations that are going on in Kashmir. India's position on this is that these are temporary and the lockdown will be removed in due course. And things are not as bad as the Pakistanis claim. Whatever it is, Pakistan has not been able to get the support of the international community. It's quite isolated. Not even the Organization of Islamic Countries has supported Pakistan's position, which is basically that the Kashmir issue should be internationalized. So that's not going to happen. But I think the bigger problem really is what happens domestically and what the reaction of Kashmiris will be. I mean, while the development agenda is fine, I mean, I think it's a good thing for the long run. It will help with Kashmir's development, but you've got to get over the short run. The short run is how to bring in, how to win support of the Kashmiri people. And if you locked up the whole mainstream political establishment in Kashmir, I think there's a lot of hard work to do there.
India's Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, gave us an extensive interview. So when he was here on his visit to Singapore, and his message was very clear. Firstly, that this is an internal matter for India. The whole thing stems from India scrapping a certain constitutional provision which attached Kashmir, which related to Kashmir in a certain way, which provided a certain constitutional protection. Now, with that gone, Kashmir becomes a little more like any other state. Indians have the right to buy property there, which earlier wasn't the case. So now, and India's basically point for doing this is that, the integration of Kashmir was a project that was unfinished since the independence of India. So it's a 70-year goal that has just been achieved according to them. Because with this, now you have, hopefully they say, a free flow of business into investment into Kashmir. So that is a big thing. They say Kashmir as such is lagging the rest of India in investment.
Okay, Nirmal, if I can ask you a question, since you're in Washington and we're talking about Kashmir, how does the Trump administration view the situation in Kashmir? I know they had at one time offered to mediate and so on. Also, how does American public opinion view what's going on in Kashmir?
Well, there's a lot of concern in Congress. There's been a lot of noise in Congress about it, about the Indian clampdown, security clampdown, human rights, and so forth. And Imran Khan, Prime Minister of Pakistan, came out with an op-ed in the New York Times. That created a bit of a stir. There is some public interest in cities like DC, not in the rest of America, I should say. The Trump administration, the president himself, has not said all that much. He hasn't come out to sort of condemn India or anything. He's just said that he hopes that they can India and Pakistan can sort it out. He has said he is available to mediate if he's asked to. And he hopes that the Kashmir situation can be resolved. That's about it. Quickly, last question, 30 seconds each of you. What would you say are the top 3 challenges that Prime Minister Narendra Modi faces?
Probably the top challenge is fixing the economy, getting the economy back on track, getting growth back up. That is probably going to take him the bulk of his new term. Kashmir, settling the situation in Kashmir is the second challenge. I think that is also a long haul, and that will take a lot of doing. And finally, I think integrating with Asia economically, including the RCEP.
Number one is Kashmir, because it's a tense situation, and well, it's a situation which can affect the economy too. So that's one thing that Modi has to get right. Number 2 would be economy, as he says. If India is looking to double their economy in 5 years, I think I read that they have to grow at a rate of say 9%. Now, if you're doing 5%, then that goal becomes kind of questionable. The third thing is something which actually I heard Prime Minister Modi say in his victory speech. So just after he was re-elected and he was addressing his party workers shortly afterwards, he was saying he amended his, the slogan for the party. So his party always says, "Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas," which translates as, we carry everyone along and we bring development to everybody. So in his, re-election speech, he added a third thing. The third thing was Sabka Vishwas, which means we win the confidence of everybody. And that, I think, is a question which has been raised against the Modi government, that that while they represent the majority Hindu interests very well, perhaps they are not as good with the minorities, especially the Muslims.
Thanks, Bhagya. Thanks, Vikram. Thanks for spending time with us. So, in the US, the Trump administration sees India, notwithstanding Kashmir, the Trump administration sees India under Modi as a partner they can work with. There are some issues. President Trump does mention Indian tariffs now and then, and the US has essentially forced India to stop buying Iranian oil. But the US has also not asked India to cut its stake and involvement in the port at Chabahar in Iran, through which India supplies its development support to Afghanistan, which serves US strategic interests as it helps the Afghan government. And the US has not complained as loudly as it has in the case of Turkey about India's purchase of the S-400 missile system from Russia. So India-US relations are in a new era as well, certainly closer than before, notwithstanding occasional irritants that are always present in a complex relationship, but in a strategic sense, fairly aligned. Prime Minister Modi was in DC recently and will be here again in New York for the UN General Assembly, and will also be holding a rally in Texas for the Indian community in America, all that in the next few weeks. And that's a wrap for this edition of the Asian Insider. Do drop us a note, tell us your views. Until next time, I'm Nirmal Ghosh.